I hope your sessions were productive. I went to all 6, and some of the buzzwords that I heard were wedge points, veteran support services, standardizing transfer credits, training ground, and my favorite was solutions. So what we'd like to do now is I'd like you to hear, and I'm sure you'd like to hear from 2 of the administration's driving forces in education, our Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, and Secretary of Labor, Hilda Solis. So if you would, whoops, wrong side. Okay, so would you like to come up and give your reports?
First of all, can we have a huge round of applause for Dr. Biden for bringing us all together? It's a pretty remarkable day, and I had about a 90-minute speech, but it's the end of the day, and so I'll say 3 quick things, and we'll move on. First of all, this is, I'd say, a historic day. We've never had this kind of attention at the White House nationally on community colleges. I want to thank Dr. Biden for her tremendous leadership. I want to thank Martha Cantor, my undersecretary, who's doing an extraordinary job. And I think folks feel and sense that there's never been a greater spotlight. There's never been a greater sense of urgency and a greater sense of opportunity. Community colleges are absolutely essential, desperately essential, to hitting the President's goal of leading the world in college graduates by 2020. We cannot get there without your leadership and hard work. We cannot educate our way to a better economy without what you're doing every single day to make a difference in the lives of students. So the urgency, the sense of importance, and the opportunity, I can't overemphasize. Secondly, for all the success stories, we always have to be very candid of ourselves, and at the end of the day, we have to get a lot better at what we do. And everyone here knows this, about a quarter of younger students, older students, we heard about an 82-year-old going back to school today, and we love that. But at the end of the day, about a quarter of folks who enroll in community colleges graduate after 3 years. And we have to find ways to be creative and drive that number up pretty significantly. There are real challenges. We had a great conversation. This term, a non-traditional student, is probably the wrong term. The non-traditional is now the norm. It's the new normal. And we had a term, 21st century student. Well, we can work on the definitions, but the fundamental question is, are our institutions set up to deal with 28-year-olds raising 3 children and trying to work a job and trying to better their life? And some places we are, some places we're not doing enough. But for all the challenges that we're all facing and the need to get dramatically better at a very rapid rate at a time of declining resources, so none of this is easy, for every challenge, we heard example after example of extraordinary success stories. I think a big part of our job is to better share those best practices. All these challenges are being solved somewhere in this country. I'm absolutely convinced. What we have to do is to take to scale what's working. And whether it's a clearinghouse, a website, a way to let folks know, here's where we're struggling, here's the niche, here's a set of metrics we're using to measure, and here's how we know we're getting better, we think we can do a much better job of sharing those best practices. So it's a time of real challenge, but I think a time of amazing opportunity. And as community colleges help families get back on their feet, you're going to help the country get back on its feet. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your hard work. It's now my honor to introduce my partner in this work, Secretary Solis. She's doing an extraordinary job. We've had unprecedented investments, Pell Grants, making the FAFSA form simpler. First time ever, $2 billion coming through her agency with a spotlight solely on community colleges, and that's coming out very, very soon. Please give a warm round of applause to Secretary Solis.
Thank you. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. And I also want to do a shout out to Dr. Jill Biden for convening this important White House Community College, but also give credit to our great president for having the foresight to do this. It's wonderful to be here, and also to be among leaders like Melinda Gates and Penny Pritzker for their leadership and investment in our nation's education and training programs. I'm a big believer in community colleges, and I know how important a role they play in higher education. I had the privilege many years ago of serving for 8 years on a local community college board, Rio Hondo Community College, and let me tell you, I learned quite a bit. And it is coming into play. And I am just excited to see the enthusiasm, the thoughts and words that I heard from so many individuals in our own panel discussion about industry, the fact that we really have to reach out far beyond what we traditionally are used to doing. And it is about looking at the new now. the new non-traditional students, so to speak, and also the new elements and crisis that confront so many of us. I constantly think about the people who are unemployed. I think about the dislocated worker who isn't just the 17-year-old, the one who's looking for that first summer job or first job, but for that 45 and 55-year-old individual who's having a tough time. Maybe they just completed a high school education years ago, have never been before an interview because they've been employed for a long time, and now they have to somehow get with the program and get some skills and get some confidence. And having all those challenges ahead, we have to have good services available for them. So I know how important that is. And I'm excited that Dr. Biden, I believe, mentioned earlier that through the Recovery Act Reinvestment Program, that we have amended the 2009 bill to allow for a trade adjustment assistance program to establish a community college training initiative. And this is a Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act signed by the President, which included $2 billion over a 4-year period. And it's a new initiative, and it's going to be targeting those students that I talked a little bit about, dislocated workers, TAA, trade adjustment assistance, those that may have lost their job because of trade issues. But I think the important element here is that we're all going to strive to produce more people that have an experience at a community college. So whether it's for a 1-year or 2-year program, those are things that we currently know that we have to devise. And it's about capacity building. It isn't about just acquiring more classroom space. It's about actually developing programs and curricula and making sure that we can build out these programs, that they last longer than the funding does. And that's what our attempt is going to be here. We're going to be providing the first rollout over this next year that'll start at about $500 million. We'll be announcing the grant at the end of the month, and we're going to also make sure that we provide services to Puerto Rico, the District of Columbia, and we hope that these grant awards will number anywhere from $2.5 million for each state. So states can work together in a consortia with other community colleges and hopefully partner with all the industry folks and things that we've talked about today so that we have a more robust program. So I'm very excited about that opportunity and know that we're going to have good partners here. So I just want to lastly say to you that one of the things that I have come to learn in the last 18 months on the job, people want to know where jobs are. People want to know if they're ready with their skills, and if they're not in that appropriate place because their skills have to be improved upon, where can they go for help? So we just launched a program through the Department of Labor called myskillsmyfuture.org. myskillsmyfuture.org. You can go in, put in your current job occupation, find out what skills are needed to upgrade, and you can also identify the nearest place where you can get the training, but also where the job site is. That's great. That's a start. On the second day that we announced the program, we had over 200,000 hits. So I'm excited that there are people out there that want to get more information, and I think we're all in a perfect place to be able to make that happen. So again, thank you so much, and I salute all of you for being here and enjoyed very much our panel discussion. Thank you.
Secretary Solis and I moderated the panel discussion on community colleges and industry. And I just want to focus on two things that we discussed. We really talked about what's working in those partnerships, and there's really a number of things that are working very well. Formal partnerships that exist that have reciprocity between the company and the community college are being really successful. Partnerships where the cities and states are not only, they're part of the coordination and development of the program, but they're also lending support, particularly tuition support. Programs or partnerships that have flexible delivery, whether it's the time of day that curricula is delivered, or it's a vehicle, whether it's at the workplace, at the school, or online, or using different types of technology. Our group also felt that what was working in public-private partnerships is if there's a clear and accessible pathway. In other words, the career path for the individual is clear with the training that they're going to be receiving or are receiving. Partnerships that also include apprenticeships and internships were very highly regarded and have been very successful. And obviously, it's extremely important that the delivery is recognizes that our workforce that is often taking courses needs to have courses offered at a flexible time, because oftentimes our students are not available at our regular 9 to 5, if you will. But we also talked about what are the challenges and what are the issues that partnerships or the community colleges are facing in working together. And we heard about the issue of remediation, what a challenge it is that 60% of the adults in Philadelphia cannot pass the literacy test to get placed into community college. 90% of the students in Chicago need some form of remediation. These are real challenges that the community colleges are dealing with. The community college leaders also talked to us about the need for dollars for capacity building so that they're able to engage with corporations to deliver the kind of training and skills delivery that we were talking about earlier today. There's a complaint that each state has its own funding vehicle, and that makes it very hard for a company to take a successful partnership with one community college and replicate it to others. There was much discussion also about credit and how do we streamline credit or recognize credit. It seems that the ACE sometimes recognizes credit for apprenticeships, but then the community colleges don't, or it's unclear if one gets enough credit or credit for technical training such that then a worker can begin to advance their education based upon a level of training that they've already received. Finally, we talked about the perception of community colleges. And there was a real feeling that community colleges are undervalued and that we need to do more to celebrate the great work that's being done by the community colleges. You know, corporations talk about their number one biggest concern is talent. And when they wake up and they really look out at their workforce, they realize what a large percentage of their workforce is actually either in the community college system or has come from the community college system. And so this is a real opportunity as we see it. And it's not all about money. Many of the community college leaders said to us they'd like more mind share of the business leaders in their community because they want to reinvent themselves to be more relevant to the various businesses in their community. They want to rethink how they deliver their product. And so there's a real, what was so encouraging is there's an absolutely positive attitude about working together. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Heather Higginbottom with the White House Domestic Policy Council, and I had the pleasure of co-moderating the panel on the importance of community colleges to veterans and military families. And we had a really rich discussion with some students, veterans, military spouses, some experts in the field, community college presidents and administrators, and the distinct honor of our co-moderator being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and somebody who was quite engaged in the conversation and not able to be here right now because he had an appointment with the president. It was a great conversation. I tried to distill it, and I hope I didn't leave out any of the critical points, but we affirmed the important role that community colleges play in the education of veterans and in military families, and then a few of the challenges and barriers to that. One challenge in particular was the need to ensure that there is a transition, a system of support from the active duty into education, and that in that process of leaving the military, there's engagement with institutions of higher education, most notably community colleges. In addition, we talked a lot about the services and supports that are necessary on campus. We had Derek, who the president referenced in our speech, talking about forming a vets group on campus at a community college and the importance of having vet-to-vet support and also institutional support so that as students transition out, go to four-year colleges or complete their two-year degrees, these groups can sustain themselves and the importance of that. We also heard about the San Diego district and the intensive, comprehensive sets of supports that are necessary to help veterans. And so that led us to a discussion about what are the best practices in this space. And while we were able to talk anecdotally about some notable and successful programs, we identified an important need of collecting data and performing some analysis on that to understand what should be replicated. And I think the most important recommendation that the group came to was the establishment of a process at the federal level to understand and analyze, collect, understand, and analyze data and be in a position to help disseminate that to institutions through the military. And we talked about the Department of Education, the Department of Defense, and Veterans Administration coming together to support that work. But Admiral Mullen made a very important point that I think everyone agreed with, which is that while we need to more systematically collect data about these programs and understand the best practices, we also know there are several things we can do that are working and that are very important. And once again, we highlighted the veteran-to-veteran support, the importance of priority placement in some campuses so that veterans are admitted into the school on a priority basis and given the supports they're needed. The military spouse career advancement accounts were quite popular in the room and obviously across the country. And that we need to really examine how we're maximizing the GI benefit, the GI Bill and those benefits to ensure that we're providing the resources and support to the veterans. So the one other thing, and Penny just mentioned it, it came up a lot in our discussion, was the stigma that is sometimes associated with community colleges and that is sometimes an obstacle for members of the military and veterans as they're leaving. And so that's something that on all sides, both on the defense side and the educational institutional side, people talked about trying to grapple with. Thank you.
I'm James Quall with the Department of Education, and Secretary Duncan and I had the opportunity to join the discussion group around college completion. I've already apologized to the members of this group for the many worthwhile comments that I'm not going to be able to repeat because it was really a terrific group with a lot of perspectives and a lot of expertise. So I hope no one will take this personally. One theme that did come through very strongly was the fact that community college students are different from those in the past. Most of them are what we used to consider non-traditional. 75% of them either are working or they have children of their own, or they're attending part-time, they aren't living on campus, and the needs to pay careful attention to this population. Someone did suggest, Secretary Duncan, that we start calling them 21st century students, since when the vast majority of students attending our colleges are non-traditional, the term may no longer have meaning. Some of the things that were talked about in terms of being important for serving this population, one is that time is the enemy. It takes a very long time. Someone cited the statistic that it takes 5 years on average to earn an associate's degree. That's a very long time for something to go wrong. People talked about the importance of communicating the value of the credential so that people understood the reason that they were working hard and the reason that they were, that the light at the end of the tunnel was important. And people also talked about professional development for community college instructors, which is something that's often overlooked and is particularly important. Another topic that we spent a lot of time on was the need for developmental education. People talked about the diverse backgrounds and skills that people bring to community colleges. Some of them need touching up in a particular area, even if they've just finished high school. Some of them are adults who need refreshers. Some of them are people who need a great deal of adult basic education or English as a second language. Some of the things that have been identified as being promising in the area of developmental education, there are a number of programs that integrate developmental instruction with technical and academic courses. Those seem quite promising, partly because they do help students see the value of what they're learning, and because they do destigmatize those classes and help people understand that there's some important content and skills that they're learning. Another thing that was mentioned was the use of technology as a way to help people master these skills quite quickly, and particularly technology that was integrated with additional instruction, not technology on its own. On the whole, I think the tone of the conversation recognized that there are a great deal of challenges that community colleges face, but as some of the other speakers have mentioned, also a sense of hope that a lot of these challenges are being met in different places around the country, and the real question for us is how do we identify those solutions and all learn from them.
Good afternoon. I'm Cecilia Rouse. I'm one of the members of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and I'm a longtime fan of community colleges. I had the pleasure of co-moderating with Jean Sperling the breakout session on financial aid. So just like the other breakout sessions, we had representatives from all levels, and that proved to be very interesting and important for our breakout session. So first, we think about it from the individual side, and I think we can all recognize the many challenges. One of the great virtues of the community college is the low tuition that typically, it's much less, the tuition is much less costly than a four-year institution. However, we also know that the tuition cost is not the full cost of attendance. I see a lot of heads nodding. And that we also have to consider not only the fees that students are paying at the institution, but also the fact that many of them are working, but nonetheless, they still have to, while they're in school, they have other bills to pay, et cetera. So there's the full cost of tuition, and it's much broader. And we considered, I'm going to just go ahead and go with the 21st century student. We considered that many of these issues are especially important for the 21st century student. Many of these students are not aware of the financial aid opportunities. Many of them are first-generation college students. We talked about the need, therefore, to simplify the financial aid process, simplify the forms. It's also been, we also talked about, and this is a little bit of a solution, we talked about how important it's been. One of the things the president did last year was notify financial aid officers that they could go back and reevaluate income for individuals who've been dislocated, and how important that's been for families, both of independent students whose spouses may have lost their jobs, or for dependent students whose parents have lost their jobs. We also talked about the challenge of financial aid when you're talking about developmental education. In terms of, I'm going to talk first about the individual students. So the challenge that we had a little bit of a discussion of solutions on was for financial aid for the 21st century student. And I think one of the things for our consideration here at the federal government is whether we should be rethinking the work disincentive for eligibility for the Pell Grant. That for independent students, there's a big penalty for them to continue working, and it reduces the amount of Pell for which they're eligible. In addition, we were encouraged to consider ways of consolidating the many different forms of financial aid, especially the different kinds of loans, and to just somehow simplify the whole process. In addition, on the individual side, this is a little bit more at the institutional level, we were reminded that there are many different forms of financial aid. And so we should be thinking not just in terms of the monetary financial aid, but thinking of aid in terms of student child support services, so child care services, transportation services, and other family services. So all those support services are very important forms of financial aid as well. But then we were also reminded, as we were considering, how expensive it is for the student, that the institutions have to consider their affordability as well. And institutions are right now in the perfect storm, which is it's on the one hand, it's a happy storm where enrollments have been increasing. On the other hand, we have at the state level decreases in public funding. So we have decreases in revenues, which have meant, especially in the financial aid office, cuts in terms of financial aid officers, and I see other heads nodding. So as a result, we have financial aid officers who are overworked, overwhelmed. We heard a story of a financial aid officer who represents his state working on a Sunday afternoon, gets a call from a financial aid officer who just can't take it anymore, who ends up quitting. And this is at a time when enrollments have increased, the need has increased, and yet the services have been cut back on the institution. On the institutional side. So just when we all thought we were in the depths of despair, we had a solution from the Connecticut Community College System, which has been really basically adopted a virtual financial aid office. And so with their virtual financial aid office, it has two aspects which they believe is the most important. One is when they work with the student, so all of the information is up on the web and is very accessible, and it's meant to have language which is accessible to the low-income student. The students can therefore follow their entire financial aid process soup to nuts, and they know exactly where they are in the process. They know how much money they've got, how much they're eligible for. In addition, they package their students as full-time students, and so the students can say, well, if I'm a full-time student, this is what I'll be eligible for. If I go half-time, they can see how much less they will get. And this is important because students, when they're coming in at this stage, don't really know what level of student they want to be, what intensity they want to enroll for. And so what have been the results of the virtual financial aid office? We have their financial aid applications are up 169%. The awards have been up 250%. The Pell Grant recipients are up 176%, and their Pell Awards are up 400%. And all of this without an increase in their financial aid offices and without having other overwhelmed financial aid officers either. And they also point out this is when enrollments have gone up about 46%, and their full-time student enrollments have gone up 105%. So we had a really nice solution we had for, I think, what is a very systemic problem, which I'm sure all of you can share. And it was a wonderful conversation that I hope we will continue. Thank you.
I don't know if you can see me. Our session was on pathways to the baccalaureate degree. I'm Martha Cantor. I'm Undersecretary for the Department of Education. And we were fortunate to have Albert Ojeda in our session the whole time. And he kicked it off by telling us about his pathway. And his pathway included a couple of things that sort of guided the rest of the conversation from challenges to solutions. And what he said was that when he got to Estrella, he got into the MECHA program. And he immediately connected into a learning community, which I thought was very instructive because that institution was using evidence that learning communities work. Further, he took classes that transferred to the baccalaureate degree institution. He knew he wanted to go to ASU. He reminded us that many students don't know where they want to go, which led to another set of challenges that we discussed. And then he concluded by telling us that the Maricopa Community College District has an ASU, Arizona State University Pathways program now that caps tuition for 4 years. So students know what the cost is going to be for tuition, and there were some other incentives for room and board and so on. So it's the kind of sample, I think, that is very instructive and sort of guided the rest of our conversation. A big set of challenges, obviously, to the baccalaureate degree. Too many choices for students. This is sort of taking the student-friendly perspective, a lot of inconsistency in the advice that students get depending on who they talk to, lack of clarity about the credit hour. Many students are undecided, and there are disincentives for students that are undecided about their pathway. And then, of course, when they think they're going to be able to transfer the units that they took, the courses that they took, they found out that some institutions will accept them and others won't. And we also know that the course numbering systems are varied across the country. And then finally, we had another student in our group that talked about, the fear of even filling out an application and how do I do that and how do I figure out where to go to get that done. And of course, there are lots of solutions to these. But bottom line, the college information isn't easily understood and isn't easily accessible to students. So we have a lot of work to do there that students reminded us about. This lack of clarity for students is a major challenge for us. Inconsistent requirements, inconsistent advising, not student-friendly, as I said. And the good news was we had a student from Phi Theta Kappa that told us about College Fish, which is a website that's free to any student in the country or prospective student that can look at institutions and gives you a pathway that you can sort of self-guide. So it's, innovations like this that we want to shine a spotlight on. We also talked about lack of institutional consistency and, a lot of concern about affordability and capacity. What courses count within an institution? How hard or easy is it to get the faculty from the 4-year institutions and the 2-year institutions together to work it out? And I think Pat Callan reminded us that this is a job that states can provide leadership on. There was some discussion around, do we really support governors to do this kind of work? Should it be just part of what state policy needs to get done? But really, how to get from a 2-year to a 4-year institution is really a matter of state policy, and the federal government can support those discussions in a variety of ways. I talked about the articulated pathways. There were many examples from many people in our session about states that have clearly articulated pathways. to the baccalaureate degree from two-year schools. Another challenge that came up was how do we create the pathways from career technical programs, vocational schools, training programs to the baccalaureate pathways, and that is again a challenge for us. Finally, a big solution: use what works. We know many things that work. I think I mentioned that at the beginning. There are lots of innovations across the country that are tried and true. I think the Connecticut example is a good one on financial aid. And pathways to the baccalaureate degree, we need to institutionalize what works and really shine a spotlight on those high-impact practices that are both practices that states can learn from and institutions can do more of. So it was a very exciting, and I want to thank all of the members of our group for a very lively conversation, and we have a lot more to do. Thanks so much.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Melody Barnes. I'm the director of the Domestic Policy Council, and I had the pleasure of co-moderating a session with Melinda Gates. And our session was called Community Colleges in the 21st Century. And I think one of the interesting comments that was made that served as a backdrop for our discussion was the fact that community colleges recognize that they're an important part of higher education, but at the same time, they recognize that they play a very distinct role in higher education and thinking about the challenges and solutions given that particular backdrop. When we talked about challenges, there's a broad grouping that we refer to as culture. It was something that we came back to a couple of times in our conversation. And one of the first things that we talked about was, or just to back up for a second, this is a conversation about rethinking culture and also thinking about some of the challenges to culture as community colleges confront some of the 21st century issues that are facing them. One of the issues that we talked about was the role of alumni and the fact that many community colleges, not all, but many of them have not significantly kept in contact with their alumni, and for reasons, some of them financial and building a financial base, but also because you recognize that alumni over time will have additional training needs and that community colleges can provide additional services to alumni. Building and sustaining that network is very, very important. We also talked about the importance of deploying technology and the challenges that surround that and the use of data that would allow us to, again, track alumni, track students, track transfer of credits, and that being one of the challenges that face community college. We talked about the role of faculty as well, and the important role that full-time faculty obviously plays, but also the role that adjuncts play on the community college campus, and the importance of incentivizing and supporting faculty as they're trying to take on new innovations. You know, one of the things we talked about was the fact that faculty are up for about anything. It's kind of you say let's, we say go. Very nimble, very flexible, but at the same time, we have to be practical and realistic about providing important supports and incentivizing them. And then finally, one of the things I think many people have touched on is the issue of retention, and that being one of the biggest challenges facing community colleges. The second challenge that we talked about, and others have touched on it this afternoon as well, is financial challenges, both to schools and for students, and in particular, given the population that community colleges are often serving and very proudly serving. You know, we talked about single mothers and single parents, the need for childcare, a whole range of other issues that put downward pressures on students and downward financial pressures on students, not to mention the fact that community colleges are often doing a whole lot and not necessarily doing that with a whole lot of resources. Then we talked about solutions, and one solution, and I think almost everyone here has touched on it, is the important role that technology plays. And there are several different components of that. We talked about the transformative use of technology to build on competency and the shift in thinking not just from seat time, but as I said, to competency, and the important way that technology can help us solve that problem. Accessibility, which is an issue that many people have talked about, and the cloud and online technology being a way to increase the course offerings that were available to students. Also, this problem that we talked about with regard to tracking students' transfer of credits, technology obviously can play an important role there. Student-centered learning, so meeting students where they are, where students really are adept in a particular piece of information or in a particular course offering, letting them move along, but when they hit a point where they need more instruction, more training, the role that technology can play there. Also, I mentioned the collection of data as a challenge. Technology obviously playing an important role in the solution, particularly as we look towards developing best practices for education, and also supporting faculty. As many faculty have any number of courses, 5 courses that they have to teach, and that can be a burden that they accept willingly, but at the same time it prevents a lot of people from playing the expanded role as mentor, but technology can play an important role in lifting a little bit of that so that faculty can play an additional role with their students. And finally, and this is something that both Secretary Solis and that Penny mentioned earlier, the partnership role, the partnerships between community colleges and the private sector, and also public-public partnerships that were discussed, and the importance of learning within context, and also that being an important variable for retaining students, that it's a much more enjoyable and practical experience for students. They really feel like they're moving down the road that they started and moving towards the goals that they set out for themselves at the beginning of the process. And I would just conclude by saying, and this is something, again, that many people have touched on. Usually when you speak, you shudder when everyone has said something that you've written down. But in this context, I think it's reassuring that we do have a great sense of what we need to do. And at this point, it's about dissemination and it's about scaling these very, very important solutions to the kinds of challenges that we face. So thank you.
So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today on this national conversation on community colleges. I'd like to thank Admiral Mullen, who Heather said had to leave. I'd like to thank everyone on stage here, all the cabinet secretaries. To my friend Melinda Gates, thank you for being here. To the press, a special thank you for getting out the word about how great community colleges really are. And you know, I mentioned that homework, so you all have homework to go back to your communities, your businesses, and your schools, and start the conversation again and talk about what you learned today. This is our moment in history to make a difference, so let's grab that opportunity. I have one more quick announcement. Let's see. Oh, going forward, we have the federal grants that are scheduled to begin this year. We have the Skills for America Future Business Partnerships. We have the Gates Completion Grants and the Aspen Prize Awards. And then Arnie is going to have a virtual community college summit, which will be next year, right? So I know you're all tired, but I have one more announcement. Many of you know my husband, Joe Biden. He's always supported me. I could not have this career if it weren't for him. He's always supported education. He's always supported educators. So I told him, he knows what I've done. This is my life's work. And so we're having a reception at the Blair House, and he's heard about this for days and days. So I'd like you to come over and say hello. So I hope that we see you all there. Thank you.